Hi, I'm Adam Williams, creator and host of Humanitou, a podcast that empowers connection through conversations of humanness and creativity. Today I'm talking with artist Dareece Walker. Dareece lives and works in Brooklyn, New York. He's been there for some years now since getting his Master of Fine Arts degree at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, and he also has roots in the Midwest and in Colorado, where he got his undergraduate degree in Visual and Performing Arts at the University of Colorado in Colorado Springs. Dareece describes his work as combining race, identity, and religion into socio-political responses, so we talk about a couple of his most powerful art series. One that speaks directly to police brutality, and one called Black Fathers Matter, that celebrates black fathers and addresses the lack of positive imagery of black men in society. We talk about fear and vulnerability in making art, and facing one's inner critic. We talk about the process of creating and reaching into places of pain, and maybe even tears, to mine one's art. Dareece shares about a couple of collaborations too, one with a pair of Broadway theater stars, and one with the founder of Living Life Fearless, longtime friend and globe-traveling basketball player Dario Hunt. And there are other things too, of course. So here we go. My conversation with multi-talented artist Dareece Walker. Hey, Dareece Walker, welcome to Humanitou.
Hey, good to meet you. Thank you for having me, Adam.
So, look, you're out in Brooklyn now, right?
Yeah, out here in New York, Brooklyn for a couple years now.
Okay, so you're living in Brooklyn. I know you got your MFA at the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan, but you
hmm
also studied art in undergrad at UCCS, University of Colorado, Colorado Springs.
Yeah,
So,
that's right.
okay, cool. So, what I don't know is where are you actually from? Are you from the Springs? Are you from New York, somewhere else?
Yeah, it's kind of a mix-up. I'm pretty much from Colorado Springs. I say pretty much because I was born in Kansas, actually, but I was only
Okay.
there for maybe about a year or two when I was an infant. So my mom moved from there to Colorado Springs, and then we stayed there maybe until I was in about preschoolish. And she's from Nebraska. That's where she grew up. So like my grandma and all my aunts and uncles lived there. So we ended up moving back to Nebraska for a few years. So I lived there maybe till like second grade, and then we moved back to Colorado Springs. And then I would
Okay.
kind of just visit Nebraska every summer. So I kind of just stayed there in Colorado Springs. So I'm kind of from Colorado and Nebraska.
Gotcha. Well, and for me, then it's a really obvious sort of distinction between life in New York City,
hmm
living in Brooklyn, being an artist there.
Yeah.
You got this sort of Midwest thing a little bit with Nebraska, but then also the mountains out here
hmm
in Colorado. So I'm kind of curious about how that environment, how the upbringing, and the range of your experience now, not just from your upbringing, but into adulthood in New York. You've got this whole mix. So, how has that range of geography influenced your life?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's like a great variety of sorts. What's cool is like just like Nebraska, Colorado, and New York give you kind of a taste of like all of America. Like those three places kind of give you
Right.
a little bit, because I mean New York does have a beach. It's not like Miami Beach, but they do have like Rockaway Beach and things like that. So you can still get that, and it's like a huge city. So you have that like environment where everything's moving and there's always noise. And in Nebraska it's like really flat, so like in Colorado it's like always a beautiful background. Like the backdrop is just like whatever the sky looks like, unless it's cloudy, with the beautiful mountains instead of a cityscape. So it was kind of cool to trade the mountainscape for the cityscape here in New York, because like basically Manhattan from Brooklyn is like Pikes Peak to me from UCCS. you know.
Who and what were around you that have an influence that you consider to be shaping in who you are as an artist even today?
I was an only child growing up, so my mom was a creative person naturally. But in terms of like people around me and growing up, art's always been sort of like a hobby as I was when I was a kid growing up. So I always had a sketchbook naturally, and it was sort of just something I did. And I never took it seriously when I was in high school until maybe I was about a senior, getting ready to graduate. And I went to Rampart High School there in Colorado Springs. And yeah, I guess those years are when like I made like really close friends. And I remember the first year, my freshman year in high school was like the first year I won first place in an art show. It was interesting. But I didn't take an art class again until my senior year. So like I was into it, and like I always had a sketchbook in high school, but I never cared enough to like keep taking art classes and stuff like that.
Even when you weren't in art classes in high school, but you still had this kind of sketchbook uh,
Yeah.
perspective in life going on. I'm curious what you were interested. What was it, the subject matter that caught your eye or had you filling in those pages then?
Yeah, it's interesting, like reflecting on some of the stuff, at the root of it, a lot of it kind of relates to like how I approach my art practice now. Like a lot of stuff would be like just little things where I'm inserting just like a black guy into an everyday narrative, like it's me, or something, or like pictures, for holidays, or like or even little things like a rose, just classic like tropes of romance and art, just like little things that I would try to like copy, maybe something I thought was cool, or like, oh, that's going to be a tattoo one day or something. But those little things, like the more that I started to do it, the more it started to be like, oh, I'm drawing Black Santa Claus, or like this is a black person's hand holding a rose now, and so like the subtlety of that, I think, was where I kind of look back and can see connections between what I do now. But in between, like I said, I'd be drawing little things like just doodling in between class as well. But sometimes it'd be thematic.
Your art now, it does not focus on things like mountain landscapes, like where you had your a good part of your youth in
Right.
Colorado. It's on some pretty serious stuff. It's on subject matter that runs much deeper
Mm-hmm.
for you and in general for all of us, right? So it has this broader cultural significance too, and it's
Mm-hmm.
work that you have described yourself as it combines race, identity, and religion into socio-political responses. So with that work, what is it specifically that you are responding to? What are the elements of a subject that really compel you to say, I mean, I got to get into this one. I've got to say something.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of my work, so like I started out kind of just reflecting in the beginning of my process when I was at UCCS. I was trying to think about, like why I make art, why am I, an artist? Like what am I interested in? What kind of things do I want to say? And then throughout that process, answering these questions for yourself as an artist, I started to consider it was like a lot about identity and like why I am being treated a certain way. Why do people interact with me a certain way? Why are certain jokes more common? Like what, why is certain energy, a normality directed toward me when I can see it's different for others? So you start to like really think about it and try to come up with answers for it, and then that starts to become a rabbit hole of historical investigation. So it went from thinking about myself to thinking about how I'm treated in society to thinking about how people like me are treated in society. And
Right.
as I started to develop a language of thinking about that and creating work, things started to happen more frequently. I guess in the news, it seemed to be more prevalent. And I guess the sort of trigger for me reacting to politics directly was when Trayvon Martin died in 2012. Because I was making work that was political, but it wasn't directly about current events. It was loosely tied to I guess social injustice in the now, but not about like a specific happening.
Right.
And when Trayvon Martin died, I was in school, and this is like I said, even in high school when I'd have a notebook, I was in school and I was an art major in art classes, but none of the classes I could make like a work to respond to that situation that would like fit a coursework or like get credit for it. So I was literally outside of class creating this artwork in response to Trayvon Martin, like for no credit while I'm in college and art school. But I eventually talked my way into getting credit for that in an independent study because I was like, this is what I'm doing, like
Yeah,
without
yeah.
any credit at all. It's like I'm doing this, I got this stuff going on, I'm in a group show, but like you guys want me to tell you about like the basic elements in art making, like on a piece of paper. Like, I'm trying to really be an artist out here.
So the materials you use in your work also factors in. You use some pretty simple stuff that we can find kind of everywhere. It's cardboard and
Right.
charcoal, and so and a lot of the work that I have seen of yours tends to be monochromatic.
Uh-huh.
So I would say it's grayscale, sort of black and white, except it's on this brown cardboard that you tear, that you work with. By no means even, let's say, that perfect sense of cardboard, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's part of your message in itself, and I'm curious. I'd like to hear you elaborate more on that from what I've
Yeah.
already read. Why cardboard?
Yeah,
Why charcoal?
definitely. Yeah, that's a great question. The material, this is something I learned at UCCS, working with a mentor, Corey Dreith. He's a professor there, and he was telling me, there's a really an importance to considering like the materials you use and how they can amplify the message you're trying to convey. And that sort of stuck with me and made me think about what could make the meanings that I'm trying to convey more serious just by using a particular material. And cardboard was sort of around, and I just saw it and was looking at it and started to think about it, and I was like, oh well, it is brown, it's like a brown piece of paper, so I could totally draw on it. But I was like, well, drawing, was like, I don't want to just do that to do that. So then I started to think about it more, and I was like, oh well, charcoal and cardboard are both sort of materials that come from the same thing. They're both,
Yeah.
so like it's sort of like they start, so they're almost the same material in a weird way. But from there, so it's like the brown and the materials sort of already talking about recycling together, but then it's like I'm recycling or repurposing. And then I
Okay.
thought about usefulness and how cardboard's considered easily replaceable and cheap and low quality. And I was thinking about the lower class and black people, and including myself, being treated like low quality and easily replaceable or just cheap. Those types of stereotypes even persist. So I began to think about the cardboard as a metaphor for the Black American experience. And it's essentially, that's my explanation for how I use the material and utilize it to enhance my messages now.
It amazes me, the power that's in that, and something that can be overlooked so easily, something that is simple, right? So
Hmm.
we all have cardboard around, we're all ordering packages, we're doing whatever,
Hmm.
but to now have a new eye on that and to look at that as that metaphor, and then also to see your artwork on it, which I want to
Hmm.
bring us into one of those series now in particular. You mentioned the Trayvon Martin news, specifically giving you something to portray in your work as opposed
Hmm.
to the general social aspect of, say, the Black experience in America. Police Cross Lines is the name
Mm.
of one of your series. That series especially speaks to some pretty powerful stuff,
Right.
like what happened with Trayvon and some others. I lived in St. Louis for a dozen years, and I was there
Mm.
during the time when Mike Brown was killed by a police officer in Ferguson, which is
Right.
in the St. Louis area. And you have a piece called From Ferguson to Baltimore, which, of course, it just in the names of those two cities talks about spanning some geography. But also, this is a really sizable piece. We're talking 24 and a half feet
Mm-hmm.
by 4.5 feet, and that's in a collection in Belgium. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. That's a recent acquisition actually. But yeah, that's in the Mercier collection in Antwerp.
That's awesome. And I'm also, I think that really attests to how this is subject matter. This is a message that needs to be heard near and far.
Mm-hmm.
Again, going back to the names of the cities, Ferguson, Baltimore, Trayvon was down in Florida. There are examples all across the country. It seems anymore like so many of us have now lived near enough to at least one of these incidents
Mm-hmm.
that's made national news. And I just think that this work you're doing with Police Cross Lines is incredibly powerful. So it kind of begs a question for me in this as well, that I'm wondering about a fear factor for you in using your voice in this way
Mm-hmm.
when you already, I would understand if you said you feel a little bit like a target just as a black man out on the street,
Mm-hmm.
because these news headlines show that.
Yeah.
Does
Well,
fear weigh into this for you?
well, I'll say yes to answer it directly and then explain what I mean. Fear definitely is a an element of consideration, and fear for me is a good thing because it helps you recognize that you're reacting to something, and
Okay.
it's sort of like a marker to consider the mental space you're in and whatever that task is at hand, and like so why you can better understand like what the fear means. Like, is it good fear or bad fear? Like, is it run away from this fear, or is it like figure this out and get past it? Because it's important
Okay.
fear. And so like thinking about like just being a black man and like living in New York at that exact time. New York has the most police officers like per person, just like on the street, in the United States. So it was like sort of the fear, or I guess anxiety. This Police Cross Lines series that I created stemmed from my anxieties being in New York during that time when Mike Brown was shot, and Eric Gardner the year before had been killed, and things were, people were rioting in Baltimore, and here in New York we've always had the most police officers per capita, just like in groups or in the subway. And it can kind of be intimidating, especially when you feel like a target when you move around just in your body. So that sort of led me to react to that, just black bodies sort of being almost devalued in the news media because of police officers being acquitted of all charges. The plainclothes police officers who choked out Eric Gardner in Staten Island, the chokehold was deemed illegal, but all of the officers who were part of that incident are still employed by the NYPD. So
Okay.
it's a situation where something can also, you can say it was wrong, but you don't necessarily see an accurate punishment for it, and that sort of in the eye of the public, and especially the black public, when they see that happening to a black person, sort of kind of sheds light on what their value is when they walk around in the streets. So that's sort of like my reaction is this series is like, all right, the yellow tape that police officers put up on crime scene says police line, do not cross. And it's like, all right, well, you guys cross lines all the time. Like, I keep seeing
Right.
it, so I'm going to make this series called Police Cross Lines.
It takes a lot of courage, I would say, and quite a bit of vulnerability for you to then use your voice in this direct, powerful way to speak out and say, I see these things, our community sees these things, the world sees these things, and I'm helping them to see it even more.
Mm-hmm.
And I can only imagine too then that sense of, but by doing this, I might be putting a target on my back.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's especially around the time you have a show or something. So I'm just curious about that balance of, I need to use my voice. This is not something that is okay. I've got to speak up, but also
Right.
risk.
Yeah, there is risk for sure. I mean, even while you're making stuff like that, you don't even know if you'll ever be able to like show it in a gallery because like someone else has to see it and kind of curate it. So uh,
They might not want to take that heat on the gallery.
yeah, exactly. Because I remember, speaking of Colorado, when I had my show at the Fine Arts Center there, that was the series, Police Cross Lines, that I had exhibited. And a piece in the Denver Post, the headline said, "Not everyone's going to like Darice Walker's in your face paintings and drawings." So it's like, like that was like a headline that a writer wrote.
I have seen that actually. And his first line, if I remember, in that article was also speaking directly to that idea that this is the kind of thing that gets galleries into hot water. And a
Yeah.
lot of people don't want to touch this stuff.
Hmm.
Uh, I was curious when I read that. I'm like, oh man, how do you respond to that? Is that something that excites you? And it's like, yeah, you guys need to wake up. Everybody, all of us, we need to collectively come together around this
Yeah.
information, or is it also like you're kind of feeding into the problem and condemning this a little bit too, because you're already saying this is going to piss somebody off? Like sometimes that's good in art, and sometimes I could see if that means some of the
Hmm.
if it sets a tone for a certain
Right.
part segment of the audience to say, yeah, there's more of that. I don't want to see that, you know?
Definitely. Yeah, there wasn't any particular backlash actually. That show was really well received, and I think that
Good.
that article was sort of meant to elaborate on the importance of critical thinking in museums and gallery spaces versus like beauty and aesthetics always being at the forefront. So,
Right. Okay.
it's sort of like, I think it was sort of like a poke at thinking about it more and like how much art is really, making us think and feel. Yeah, it's true. Not everyone is gonna like it, but see for yourself. It's kind of like what that was. It kind of felt like, yeah, if you want to see something really interesting, check this out. It's almost like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I've wondered who do you consider your audience to be? Because
Hmm.
I could see it if I just put it into, say, two categories. You've got
Yeah.
the people who know your pain, like truly they know your pain on
Hmm.
this. And then you've got the people who need to wake up to the existence of these things.
Right.
So I'm wondering who it is you want really to see and hear this,
Hmm.
the messages in this work.
Yeah, it's interesting. My audience, I guess my target audience for the type of in your face work I make, for the people who feel the pain, they sort of understand the sentiments when the
Right.
pain's being expressed, like personally. So they don't necessarily need to relive it
Right.
visually, but they understand why it's being represented so that it's not forgotten. But that's not necessarily the target audience. That's the audience that it's sort of like made with respect to.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
the target audience is the gallery, museum goer, the people who, like I said, with that article, how these are the kind of shows that get galleries and museums in hot water. It's like, yeah, because galleries and museums don't show work that makes people think. So it's like, this is me trying to make work in a way that is against the sort of norm in the galleries, and like trying to insert some more, I guess, information and keep conversations about these situations going, amongst these individuals, so that it's not sort of something that happened a long time ago, but like, oh, like this is real serious, this is making me feel. And then it translates to different people, not the people that know already.
I want to talk about another series that you have that is called Black Fathers Matter.
Hmm.
And I'm curious, do you have kids? Are you
No,
a father?
actually, I'm not.
Okay. Well, then I'm curious about your relationship with your father.
Hmm.
If
Definitely.
and I guess also as if there's more to also elaborate on about the motivation for this particular work. But
Uh-huh.
I'm curious first, I guess, about relationship or not, good or not, with your
Right.
father.
Yeah, my relationship with my dad is complicated. Um, I mentioned before that I grew up as a only child to a single mother. So my dad and mom were never actually married. He was an army guy, so he was
Okay.
stationed in like Shreveport or Fort Carson, or no, yeah, something like that. I think it's Shreveport Army Base or something
Okay.
in
Yeah. In
Colorado.
Colorado Springs.
Yeah,
Okay.
and yeah, I sort of grew up only seeing him really intermittently, and part of this, like the motivation for this series, going back to audience, was sort of focusing on the opposite, and instead of making work for the people who know already, I'm making this series is more about making images that I didn't get to grow up with, or memories. It started out, as a black male. When you grow up without a father, you look outside of the home for a father figure, um, sort of lessons and tools. You sort of see a man, and you sort of like pick what you like and don't like, and you sort of emulate it as you grow up. Your friends and your friends' dads, you sort of pick those things up. And
Okay.
so like I'm sort of revisiting while I'm photographing fathers around the city, um, remembering how as a kid I would look at fathers, sort of, be like, oh, he's cool, or like, oh, that dad is a nerd, like, oh, that, but he has a nicer car, or like, just like, oh, okay, so, but he walks different, like, oh, if I want to be cool like that, I gotta walk like that. So you like watch and you observe, but then like that's sort of the as an adult looking at it, you sort of admire it from a different standpoint, and it's sort of like the courage it takes and like the effort that he's actually there making the memories. So it's like sort of celebrating that man doing it, versus like my father who wasn't.
Gotcha. And when you are seeing these men now, and in the images, the visual art that you create through this with
Hmm.
fathers, black men in particular, of course, by the name of the series being Black Fathers Matter,
Yeah.
and they're with their children, young children. Maybe it's in a stroller, maybe they're playing. You know, you're seeing that and then recasting that in a positive light. When I think it would also be understandable if other emotions came into play for you, perhaps
Hmm.
anger, or because of what you didn't have.
Right.
And in a sense, even as a grown man now, for you, you still don't have some of those, uh that relationship value
Hmm.
that I would understand if you feel like, well, I wish I did.
Right.
Did you ever go through some of that as well, where were you angry for a while, and did that come out in a different way, or how did you come to this place of warmth and positive
Hmm.
perspective that now you portray that in your visual art?
Right. Yeah, this whole Black Fathers Matter series was sort of it was about positivity, because a lot of my work, I'm protesting, but I'm also protesting lack of that type of imagery just in general. Like I didn't, as a black kid, grow up
Right.
getting to see it in public view, even in advertisements and stuff. It would always have some sort of other element involved, and it didn't seem like black people were represented in normality, like normalcy. So I never got to see like
Okay.
what that even looked like. But I've actually, even at UCCS, a project that never, like, I pretty much threw away, but like helped me sort of go through that process, was I wrote like poems about the situation, and sort of made like a poetry book with drawings in it. But the
Okay.
drawings are really bad, so like I kind of just saved the poetry. But those poems were like okay, but not great. But they sort of worked out how I felt. I sort of tried to key in on my adolescence and why I would be mad, and a lot of those memories and anger just came from, being a kid and kids talking about like what they did with their dads, or bragging about like, oh, my dad this, and then you being like, yeah, well, my dad's in the military, or like, like and not and having nothing else to say, like, oh, what'd you
Right.
do with your
Okay.
dad? And you're like, haven't seen him in like a year, so it's like those awkward situations that you get put
That's
in
tough.
as a child, and you don't even really know why. So it's like having to revisit that and understand that, like, you don't have to be mad about that, you know, and that sort of relinquishes some of the anger, and you don't have to be mad. You can just understand that, you know, as an adult now, it's different, and that's why it's sort of like the respect. I'm like sort of respecting, like, these young men. I'm like, wow, that guy's young, and he's being seemingly responsible. So that's also the thing. It's like the series also doesn't necessarily, like, there's a little bit of ambiguity in terms of like, we don't know for sure. That could be the dad's weekend with the kids or something, or like,
Oh, yeah.
like that, like all the, or it could be the uncle, or like the cousin. It's not so much about the dad, but like the father figure, and like the black male role model.
Besides your speaking to that stereotype and trying to maybe undo that a bit by saying, no, you need to start seeing everybody in general. You
Mhm.
need to start seeing these images. They exist as well. But I also wonder,
Mhm.
in this case, maybe for some of those young black men who have not stood with their children,
Mhm.
are you speaking at all to them in the
Yeah,
process?
definitely. This one's definitely different. I guess it's more for, if I could sum it up more simply, it would be like the other more protest specific projects are like for them, and the Black Fathers Matters for us, basically. Like, it's
Yeah.
like I'm
Okay.
talking to, people who look like me, intentionally with this, versus the other ones where I'm not intentionally making a statement to them, but sort of with them. Whereas this one's sort of like to us and them, uh, where it's like, recognize, that we can do this. It's like, hey guys, look, we, like, we don't all have to just, go to the club and, glorify, wasting our money on stupid stuff. We can be successful, like, and be regular. Some of the pictures are like, you know
Oh,
a dad had like Burberry sneakers on, and his little 2-year-old had Jordan shoes on. It's like, but it's like so subtle because they're just wearing t-shirts and stuff, and it's like, well, that's not like a poor dad and kid, if they have enough money for brand new stuff like that. So it's like showing black people not poor with their kids is a thing, because a lot of it's like welfare imagery and like food stamp
right.
is, so it's like showing black people with kids that's not food stamp associated is a thing too.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and it's occurring to me here that we're also not talking about there being a blame or judgment kind of aspect, but rather maybe the message to these young black men really is that you're showing this is what it looks like. Because I know you didn't see it, because I didn't see it. These
Hmm.
images aren't what's put out there in mass media. So you're playing a role in saying this is what it looks like, and it's okay to look like this. It's okay to be there in this way.
Yeah,
So that's
exactly.
cool.
It's like, yeah, we can just exist as ourselves, like we don't have to, you know like, some of the walls
Yeah.
we put up aren't unnecessary.
Right. We talked about fear with Please Cross Lines in particular. I want to bring in the word vulnerability
Hmm.
and how you face that, how you recognize that. Maybe a little different than the fear thing.
Hmm.
It's there for any artist, anybody who's creating and then also putting it out. I mean, they have to face their own inner critic first
Right.
and then put it out into public. What is that experience for you internally, and how do you as an artist overcome that to let yourself be out there in public with it?
Yeah. I think, for artists, it's sort of a thing. It's almost like you have to train yourself to get used to it, so that you recognize it and you just move past it quicker, because you always feel that sort of, I guess, resistance to want to share, because you're like you're
Right.
you're thinking about how you feel about something so intensely that like you want to convey it as like perfect as possible. So like you're really sensitive about trying to execute your idea, and you really hope that that comes across when you feel like you're done with it. So like you're definitely really sensitive each time you create something. But a lot of just higher education helped, in terms of going to UCCS and then graduate school, where you're sort of put in a position to have to understand like nuances. You have to understand yourself. You have to be open to um, the criticism in process. Like you're not even done yet, but um, you have to deal with what someone might say about something that's incomplete. So like you sort of get a thicker skin after graduate school, because you sort of get critiqued constantly.
Would you say that that's one of the primary benefits then of especially graduate school in art? Because of course I think there's an ongoing conversation, or maybe it's not even necessary as a conversation, but where some people are say, well, art school is valuable, and others say, well, of course you don't need that program to become
Hmm.
an artist. It's okay to go ahead and express yourself, and you can even become successful. But would
Yeah.
you say that thing you were just talking about, where that sense of facing the fire, the criticism, in those workshops and in different things that come along with a master's of fine arts experience, a
Hmm.
program, is that the most important piece of that, do you think?
Yeah, I would say that's probably like the second most important thing, but like
Okay.
definitely in the top, like what you should be getting out of it. That's the thing that a lot of people struggle with, though, in terms of art school, is that part. Um, but like the first most important part about just higher education in general is actually networking. People don't
Okay.
realize, the more people you meet, like you don't have to be friends with everybody, but the more people you meet, like the better your future might be, just like in general, knowing different people and in the world.
Okay.
It's just like some people that I've met in college, just you never know. It's just something weird about just because the people spread out. It's like we're in college in this city that we're in, but then after it, we all spread out around the world and around the country and stuff. And that making those sort of connections is kind of more important, because sometimes they reach out, or sometimes they remember what you were doing is similar to something someone they just met is interested in, so I just mention your name. So like you've already sort of networked your way into maybe an opportunity 20 years from now.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, so that's why it's important. It's because it's like you don't. It's like a long-term investment in terms of meeting people, relationships. But then with the art and sort of like the critique part, you really, for an artist, that part is how you sort of get moved through the process of coming up with an idea and then actually making that idea come to fruition. Because you have to, like, a lot of artists get hung up on that vulnerability and fear of being um offended almost, or not appreciated, or um
I think that's especially it being they're afraid of not being appreciated, being seen, maybe even worse, being seen as if you have no idea what you're doing. You don't
right.
belong. You don't belong here. You're not an artist. Like all these things that really end up speaking to the heart and identity possibly of that person if they really identify as I'm an artist and this is everything to me.
Hmm. Yeah, and for me, like that's why, like I said, that critique part is you it forces you to figure out how to navigate that. And for me, it was just really understanding why I do everything. Like every mark on the surface is important. Like the tears on the cardboard surfaces I treat like
Right.
brushstrokes on a canvas. I know why it's there, in the direction that it is, like all of that, like the way the corrugation goes either side to side or up and down is chosen, so like
I
every
love
every
that.
little thing is important about the piece. And for artists
It's
who aren't prepared
intentional.
for, yeah, exactly. So the thing comes into question is like, if you don't know if you don't have intentions behind everything, that's where you're vulnerable in critique.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
If you don't know why.
yeah, because someone will ask you about that, and if it's seemingly irrelevant question that you haven't considered, that's when they look at you, and that's when the artist feels weird. When artists fully have the right, like this is another thing artists forget. You can say, I don't know, or I haven't thought about that. That's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up. You can say that and move on. Like you don't have to stumble over your words and try to make something up. You're allowed to say you don't know, or that's interesting. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. You know,
Yeah.
you don't have to be scared that you're gonna look foolish.
That's good stuff to keep in mind. I think that a lot of us generally, even outside of art, tend to feel like, well, you have to have the answer. Somebody asks you a question, you can't look foolish, and so on. So I think there's a lot of other cultural stuff going on there that we bring into it, and then
Right.
especially as artists feel vulnerable.
Definitely.
If we go back to some of these socio-political matters that you
Hmm.
speak to with your work, these things are no doubt very long standing.
Yeah.
Like, I think you said something a little bit ago about showing that this stuff still is happening. And
Right.
of course, it's not like it ended with slavery. It's not like it ended in the 60s with civil rights movement. It's like there are things still happening.
Hmm.
And in that context, how you see the current times of politics, cultural division, and if you even see it as any worse, or if it really is just kind of more of the same in your perspective.
Mm. Yeah. The times right now, it's really interesting. It's hard to say the same. It's not the same. Well, basically, what's happening now is definitely a direct result of things that happened during the civil rights movement. Both good and bad things have happened. And now it's sort of, I guess, with how society works right now, there's an emphasis on political correctness. So it's more about manners, and rather than like actual education. So it
Okay.
seems basically like the racism is hidden behind manners now. You can only be racist, in certain, context where it's,
With certain people around you at a certain safe distance.
yeah, exactly. And as long as we have a permit, then we are good. So we're gonna say whatever we want about anyone because we have a permit for it. Like so that's sort of like how it's become more, I guess, socially driven and less physically directed. Like there's less, I guess, violence, but the hate is still there. And that doesn't mean that it won't happen again. It's almost like it feels like it could go either way. It could like slope down to really dwindling, and racism actually fading out to where we can have real conversations. And then there's the part where um you see how confused people are about racism in general and how the country's never really addressed it, and that's sort of what the government is sort of holding us back from growing past it. So it's almost like keeping a band-aid on after the scars healed underneath.
Yeah, I think we have. Well, you said education. I think that's at the heart of it, is because it's not about having knowledge of
Hmm.
each other being whoever we identify as different or other, right?
Yeah.
It's about, well, what words am I permitted to say? And what am I not allowed to say? And then, well, to what extent does any given person try to walk those lines instead of actually trying to learn why considering those thoughts and the words that you might, the offensive ones you might say,
Mm.
instead of understanding why those don't actually even apply and why, what's wrong with them, not about what context do I share them in or not.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because then it's like the safe words you could still use in the wrong context, but it just won't be. It'll be PG instead of R-rated, but it's still like, you know,
The wrong sentiment still is there.
yeah, the wrong sentiment's still there. Like it's the same thing. You just didn't show it gratuitously.
It's interesting to me how that has gotten wrapped up in politics, and not
Yeah.
necessarily just in recent years, although it does seem to have taken a bit of a turn into, more light is being shined on it maybe in the last few years. But
Hmm.
that it's tied into politics at all, it feels kind of strange to me. But I think, politics probably uses all kinds of tools and weapons, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's almost at the root of politics. The fact that we have parties at all, or just two parties, and
Yeah.
is a thing that is ironic in terms of like the what's best for the country is to
Right.
separate each other and to root against each other to ultimately combine again. you know, it's
Divide
a
and conquer.
yeah, it's a very jarring process that we just roll with. So I
Yeah.
don't know, like politics is very interesting. If you think about regional politics, there's typically a lower class and a higher class, and predominantly around the world, the darker people are the lower class, and that's just in most countries in the world. And it's not like the black people; it's just like
Right.
the tan people are looked at lower than the light cream people. Like it's like or like the burgundies looked
Right.
as lesser than the red because they're burgundy. It's like that,
Right.
and that's the
Yeah.
regional politic. And then the tan people are looking at the reds like they're crazy, and the reds looking at the brown like it's like a circular odd, and that's just border. So it's almost like regionality and sort of like aesthetics central to an area create a different kind of politics, like
Right.
a pseudo politics where it's like it's also race, and border, and tied together.
We find a lot of ways to divide ourselves up.
Yeah.
With all of this in mind, there is more than enough to stir up anger, depression, anxiety, confusion, all of these emotions. And
Hmm.
it's just, it's a very foggy lens to look through and
Hmm.
comprehend the world. And because I think that's one of our collective, it gets amplified in the collective failing of how
Hmm.
we don't really know how to manage our emotions and how we interact with each other. And I'm kind of curious, you are working with this very deep, again, socio-political type of subject matter, at least at times. And
Yeah.
I'm curious how you manage the subject matter that it would be really understandable if it got you fired up and pretty angry, right? So
Yeah.
how do you manage that and channel it, whether that's in your artwork or even just in daily life? Like, what is your
Hmm.
strategy as someone living in the hustle bustle of New York, which right now the coronavirus, it's a heavy hot center of
Yeah.
what's going on there, just all kinds of reasons. How do you channel it?
Yeah, it's a that's a good question. You have to really. It's like it's one of those things where I I have an objective when I think about it, and so like that's the thing is I'm not thinking about it feeling sad. I'm thinking about it to feel sad so that I can understand the emotion surrounding that idea better. So I try to give myself a particular time to think about it specifically. So it's almost like instead of loosely thinking about it throughout the day and having it influence you the whole time you're doing something, like every day to day situation. It's
Okay.
sort of like writing a diary or sitting down and just having an exercise of some sort. It's almost like that, where, before I start an artwork, if I'm about to compose something that's very sad and like upsetting, I'll allow myself to go there in isolation, so I can even, reach the point of tears because it's so sad, and then come back out of it, and then just remember what that feeling was like, and how, like, if I don't kind of feel that in what I'm drawing, then, like, I might not be crying anymore while I'm drawing it, but I remember that feeling and how I want to emulate it in what I'm drawing. So, like, I kind of like try to reach for that while I'm making something, and that's what sort of separates it for me. The emotional part is sort of like understanding why it's important, and what drove it to be there, but then having a second objective of like trying to convey why it's important, or what drove me to have that emotional reaction is wrong. So, like, for me, I like to create messages, and art's been my outlet to do that.
I think that's a great strategy, one on just a human level for how to try to work with this information, because I think we often do carry it just all day, and even maybe
Hmm.
worse at night. You're dreaming and distressed, and
Yeah.
you wake up feeling it. But to have that sort of strategy, but also I love getting that insight into your process with creating the art. I want to ask you about collaboration
Mm,
right now, because there are a couple of things that I know. For example, you had a show in which the actor and writer Daniel J. Watts had
mm,
an incredible poem, If They Gun Me Down, that was paired with your work that we've spent quite a bit of time here talking about.
yeah.
Uh, and you also have collaborated for years with a friend, another creative guy, Dario Hunt, I
Hmm.
think is right, for the
Yeah.
website Living Life Fearless.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about, making art so often is, or at least can be, a one lane solo journey kind of process. And I'm curious what you see in collaboration. And maybe it's in these specific examples, the two that I just mentioned, or maybe just
Hmm.
more broadly.
Yeah. I mean, those two examples are really strong, and sort of like provide a good understanding of like how I approach collaboration. So I'll just start with the Daniel J. Watts one. That collaboration was actually really cool, really interesting. Daniel J. Watts is an actor and performer, Broadway and other, TV. And
Okay.
him and his partners, well, him and a friend who also works on Broadway, wanted to put on a show the summer following all of the riots and protests that Police Cross Lines work was inspired by. So they were in contact with the gallery, basically, and the gallery knew a curator, and basically they said, "Hey, do you have any work about this stuff? And do you know any people?" And I was like, "Well, here's my work." And they ended up just liking my work. So that's how it started, was like, all right, now I'm going to go meet these guys. And these two guys happened to perform in Hamilton. And
Okay.
yeah, one of them is one of the lead singers on The Temptations that's on Broadway now, that you've probably all seen advertisements for. His name's Ephraim Sykes, but it was a really crazy opportunity to meet these guys. And essentially, his work, he does these things called jams, where he does poetry jam, but it's sort of like a poetry curated performance of his own original content. And that's what they wanted to do, but with an art show that communicated similar sentiments around what he's talking about. And I agreed because of listening and reading the poetry. I was like, oh, yeah, this totally makes sense, because that's the kind of creativity I would want paired with my type of work. So it was really organic in that sense. And, we've remained friends and are still in contact. That sort of leads me to the Living Life Fearless project. Me and Dario Hunt have been friends since, freshman year in high school. When we went to college, he was a business major at the University of Reno, and he started this blog/company called Living Life Fearless. And he reached out, hit me up and said, "Hey man, I want you to be like the art mind and sort of like write, opinion pieces and blog about stuff, on this site that I'm trying to do." So like we just partnered up then, and we've sort of been doing that and developing our ideas, and sort of it reached a point where we were like, we don't have to just have our opinions and our ideas and what we're into. Let's see if we can reach out to writers and photographers and people interested in creative things, and see if they want to contribute stuff. And it's led to like having a nice small staff of freelance writers who create work about anything they're interested in pop culture. Sometimes it's really niche and sometimes it's really general, but it's sort of like a media slash um, lifestyle brand where we promote creatives and individuals. So there's actually a video interview that we did with Daniel J. Watts about him and his creative process as an actor, which is on Living Life Fearless as well. So there's like things where we try to promote creativity in that regard. So that's a thing that me and Dario do continuously. And we also have a
Okay.
podcast. So yeah.
What is it that you get out of the collaboration?
Yeah, collaboration I think is important. You don't want to self isolate too much unless it's government warranted, like now, you know.
Right.
But in terms of what I get out of collaborating, there's that saying, steel sharpens steel. You kind of want to you want to surround yourself, or I at least like to be around people that motivate me, that do things I don't do, and that I find interesting. It allows you to learn from the people that you surround yourself with, rather than just be familiar all the time with what happened when you went to the store yesterday. Like those are the most important things, like just regular day life for regular people. But when you're creative, you just need to meet more creatives, because then you really understand the possibilities of being creative, and taking something serious. Because like before you're an artist, you'll laugh at one brushstroke on a canvas, and then 10 years into it, you're like, wow, that brush they made was handcrafted, and they had to create this jig that suspends them above the canvas, and their assistant has to slide them across so that they can use this broom size paintbrush to create this mark. And and that is what intrigues you about it, rather than like, oh, that's a big swoosh on that.
Right.
And meeting more creatives, and like that just like educates you more on nuance and different ways of thinking. So I think that's really important, and it allows you to help each other in the future. Possibly, you never know what will come. So like if you are motivated by someone, or you think someone's doing something really cool, spending time with them creates a bond. So like if ever something does come up, they'd be more likely to support you because you've actually made a connection, versus just meeting and never talking again.
I think showing up in the community, and that can be through art shows, or it can be to go to somebody else's show or to whatever. It's something that I feel like I connect with more and more and more, is to
Hmm.
realize that to be part of the arts community, to be an artist, also
Yeah.
means it's not just self isolating. You got to, in whether it's collaborations or not, somehow find that way to be part of it and contribute
Oh,
beyond your
100%.
own work.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. This is a Colorado podcast. Well, let me tell all you Colorado people. The way I got my uh two of my solo shows in Colorado was literally by going to those spaces a lot. Like I went to the Business of Art Center, which is now Manitou Art Center, and frequented that space a lot. I submitted to group shows, and got to know the curator at the time. And at happening to be at a show, just asked that curator when they'll have me do a solo show, and these slots open, joking but serious. And they said they would keep me in mind and email me. And eventually, weeks later, I did get an email, and they were like, is this time slot good for you? I was like, heck yeah, So that's how I got my solo show at the Manitou Art Center, was asking, you know, and then
Just being there, yeah.
yeah, and then the same with the mod boat, the Modern Bohemian. It's a staple in the community now, and
Right.
yeah, before when it wasn't what it is now. This is like 8 years ago, or
Okay.
no, 7 years ago. I was at one of their openings, and I happened to run into Brett Andrus, one of the co-owners, and it was just like, yeah, I'm an artist. Love what you guys are doing. I always love you guys' shows and openings, and he was telling me about submitting, and I was like, yeah, I know. I'm just, I'm not too big into submitting to these crazy group things. It always costs, and I prefer getting curated into stuff. So that's what I said to him. He's like, oh, well, let me see some of your work, blah, blah, blah. And then I told him how I had that show in Manitou. And then he was like interested. And he was like, you know what? We could do a show. Yeah, we should just do a show. you know? So like, it was literally like being confident, being at the places that you might like to show at, and literally starting to connect with the people that work there. And those provided opportunities.
Yeah, you're definitely speaking to places that I'm familiar with here in town. So, I got a question for you about a quote that you have on Living Life Fearless.
Mm,
We're going to bring it back around to this idea of fear before we wind ourselves down and out of here.
mm-hmm.
And something that you had said, here's an excerpt of it, is you have to be fearless to be an artist. It's not always about just getting loved. You want to love yourself fearlessly. So take a chance on yourself. And I'm curious how much that might still ring true for you, or what your take is on that now, if you would modify it, or if it's even just more deeply entrenched.
Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting. I guess in a short and sweet way, that sounds great. And I do agree with that. But I probably like add maybe a little bit. I guess maybe what I would add is just that fears is unavoidable. So it needs to be embraced, because it's always going to be there. People are going to be like, oh, I'm not scared. I'm not, it's not fear. But it's like, yeah, well, reluctance is like a cousin of fear, like indecision is a cousin of fear, like there's all these things that are parts of fear that, you shouldn't not embrace. You need to understand that when it comes up, it's a moment for you to make a decision. And if you get used to recognizing it and making decisions, you'll handle your fear better, and it'll actually become a really great productive tool for you.
It's a practice.
Yeah.
I mean, all of art is a practice, right? Creating, but then to also, like you're saying, to really get to be aware of yourself and to recognize those sensations of fear or doubt. Indecision is a decision. If you're just sitting
Exactly.
on the fence, not doing anything. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to bring us to our last question here, Darice.
Hmm.
It's more of a summary thought of what we talk about here at Humanitou and what this whole conversation really has been about, which is humanness and creativity. And the
Hmm.
question is, how do you live humanness and creativity in your life, or try to? You tackle that how you want, but how do you live humanness and creativity in your life?
Yeah. I try to be as open as possible. And like I said when I earlier, in terms of collaboration, I might not collaborate in art or business specifically all the time, with people, but I still collaborate in so many different ways. And I think that's part of what I do to be a humanist and stay more creative. I can't just always focus on my ideas. I try to connect with new people, or connect with people that I haven't connected with in a long time, because we always grow and develop and change. So sometimes you can learn from someone else's development over the years, like keeping in touch with, my grad school friends, when I see the work they're making now versus 4 years ago when we were in graduate school. I can see the growth, I can see the creativity, and that's motivating. And I try to be that for others as well. So it's like a constant like trying to be motivation with your creativity while trying to seek motivation through creative people. So that cycle of inspiration has allowed me to, in daily life, try to live as humanist as possible by helping when you can, supporting when you can, inviting people to other creative things that you're going to, because something they might say next to you at the space might cause you to think about what you're interacting with there differently. It's all those little things enrich your life and enrich others' lives.
We never know where the connections might come from.
Yeah.
That's another word I often use with Humanitou, is it's about connection. It's about empowering connection through conversations of humanness and creativity. So, Darice Walker, I appreciate your taking the time to get on the line here with me, share your thoughts, your insights, talk about your art. I appreciate your sharing a lot.
Yeah, thank you very much, Adam. I'm really glad you reached out. It's been a pleasure to connect with you and share with you guys.
There it is, with Darice Walker in today's Humanitou conversation of humanness and creativity. You can learn more about Darice in the show notes published on our website at humanitou.co. And hey, reviews on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Stitcher, and other players are helpful for what we're doing here. Together we can cultivate a more thoughtful, kind, and creative world. So when you can spare a minute or less to shine some light back on Humanitou and everyone you listen to here, we'd appreciate it. And if you have feedback on this conversation or the Humanitou Podcast series that you'd like to give directly to me, send me an email at adam@humanitou.co or reach me by Instagram direct message at Humanitou. And now to the question I ask you after every episode. How are you living humanness and creativity in your life? I'm Adam Williams, creator and host of the Humanitou Podcast. Thanks for being here.